Edwin Starr once uttered the immortal words war. What is it good for? His answer to that question was absolutely nothing. However, we're going to prove his answer wrong, because war is good for something, and that something is video games. Ever since video games were in their infancy, war has always been big business. One of the first examples of this was Space War. Not really a war game in the same sense, but it has war in the title, so it must be war, right? Since then, we have seen games such as Commando, Ikari Warriors, Cannon Fodder, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Medal of Honor, and 1,000,001 others. Today, we are here to take a look at one video game series in particular, and that series is Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon. In 1996, Tom Clancy and Doug Littlejohns, an ex-British naval captain, came together to create video game development studio Redstorm Entertainment. The newly founded company released their first game, Tom Clancy's Politica, in 1997. They quickly went on to make a name for themselves with titles such as Dominant Species, one of the first 3D real-time strategy games, and Rainbow Six, the first ever tactical first-person shooter. In 2000, Ubisoft purchased Redstorm, who were already working on their next game in the Tom Clancy series. In November 2001, the first ever Ghost Recon game was released. The game introduced us to the Ghosts, a squad of US Special Forces operatives from Company D, 1st Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Although entirely fictional, the highly classified nature of the Ghosts and their missions are not unlike real-world Special Forces. Set in 2008, the first game opens with civil unrest in Russia, with the Russian Democratic Union, an ultra-nationalist regime, and their leader, Dmitry Arbatov, running the country. With plans on rebuilding the Soviet Union, the ultra-nationalists begin to get the support of rebel factions throughout Georgia and the Baltic states. The US decide to deploy the Ghosts into Georgia to help put an end to the rebel threat. Angered by this move, the Russian Democratic Union complained to the United Nations about the US interference into their affairs. The Soviets begin to take full military action against Georgia, and the Ghosts are called to help with evacuating all foreign nationals. Through the course of the game, the Ghosts are sent in to slow down the RDU's spread across the Baltic states while NATO units begin to mobilise. Working deep behind enemy lines, and with the assistance of NATO forces, the Ghosts push the ultra-nationalists back into Russia. Continuing to take the fight to the Soviets, the Ghosts pursue the RDU into Moscow, with the final mission taking place in Red Square. The Ghosts put an end to the RDU leadership and liberate the Russian people. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon set a new standard in first-person shooter games. With its tactical control over the battlefield and being able to issue commands to up to 3 fire teams, we had to start thinking about the wars we waged rather than just twitch shooting. The game received critical acclaim at launch and today has a current Metacritic rating of 80. It was also awarded the 2001 Game of the Year by IGN and PC Gamer, who also gave it the 2001 award for Best Sound. Building on the first game's success, Redstorm released 3 further expansions over the course of the next 3 years. The first of these was Ghost Recon Desert Siege, which released in 2002. Set just 6 months after the events of the original game, the Ghosts are deployed in East Africa to prevent an Ethiopian army colonel invading a neighbouring country. The Ghosts soon learn that the Ethiopian warlord's plans are being supported and helped by the same Russian ultra-nationalists who launched the coup the year before. Missions played out in a variety of environments that included rocky desert canyons, exotic looking beaches and high risk structures such as an oil refinery. Improvements were also made to both your squad and enemy AI, as well as fixing a number of balancing issues and multiplayer enhancements. The low price and sticking with a formula that works ensured the continued success of the franchise. Building on that success, Redstorm released a second expansion pack in the form of Ghost Recon Island Thunder. Set in 2010, Cuba are about to hold their first democratic elections since the 1950s. One of the parties running in the election is the FDP, an anti-American faction being run by a Colombian drug cartel. Terrorising the people of Cuba and forcing them to vote for the FDP, the Ghosts are called in to ensure order during the elections. They soon discover that the FDP want control of Cuba simply to use the island as a transit point for drug shipments into the US. The campaign was split across 8 missions, and although that might not sound like much, each had multiple objectives and was spread across a huge map, meaning that each mission could take well over an hour to complete. Aside from the jungle environments, Island Thunder used the same engine and many assets from Desert Siege, but all in all, for the time, there was no denying just how good the game looked. With the tactical FPS genre growing ever more popular, Ghost Recon was still very much leading the pack. In early 2004, with Ghost Recon 2 already announced for release later in the year, Redstorm released the PlayStation 2 exclusive Ghost Recon Jungle Storm. Jungle Storm was more like a double expansion pack, featuring the 8 missions from Island Thunder and adding in a further 8. The second part of Jungle Storm takes place shortly after the events of Island Thunder. The Ghosts are deployed to Colombia with the objective to put the drug cartel that had aided and financed the FDP in their efforts in Cuba out of business. The cartel launched a number of terrorist attacks against the Colombian government, who have allied themselves with the USA. Through the course of the campaign, the Ghosts are tasked with hunting down corrupt faction leaders, defending civilian centres, freeing civilian prisoners, and cutting off the flow of drugs. It's soon learned that the cartel have a number of factions ready to cause widespread damage to Cuba and its people. To prevent this from happening, the Ghosts launch a final assault at the campsite in the hills surrounding a large communication centre and radio tower. With the help of UN peacekeepers, the Ghosts put an end to the sleeper cells in Cuba and stop the rebellion in Colombia permanently. One new addition was the ability to be able to switch control to one of the other members of your 6-man squad. The use of real-time waypoints was also a welcome addition, giving a much more tactical approach to combat situations. But given that it had been 3 years since the original Ghost Recon, the engine was now starting to creak and look very dated. But none of that mattered, since we had already begun to set our sights on what Redstorm had coming up for us later in the year. And so, in November of 2004, Redstorm released the first true sequel to Ghost Recon on Xbox, PS2 and GameCube, making this the first time the series never released on PC. It was also the first time we were all introduced to series regular Captain Scott Mitchell. So, join me again next week when we take a look back at Ghost Recon 2, its spin-off Summit Strike and the Advanced Warfighter series. Thanks for watching.